Oh, hey, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to the Efficiency Bitch podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Leone. This podcast is dedicated to all the women out there who are aspiring to have a career while raising a family. And bitch? Well, that's more than a name and even an attitude. We use it as an acronym. It's for bank, inbox, time, connection, and harmony. Each episode is labeled according to the correct topic so that you can efficiently find the topic that you're looking for. I'm here to tell you, you can have your cake and eat it too. The trick is finding efficient ways to get through the have-tos so that you can make room for your best life. I can show you how. Let's get started. Hey, Teresa, how are you? Welcome to the show.
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited that you're here today. I decided we couldn't wait, laryngitis and all. I was going to record because we needed to have you on as soon as possible. I would love for you to introduce yourself to our audience, but I want to just say really quickly how I found you. I joined Teresa's free Facebook challenge on organization and getting structured for mom entrepreneurs. And it was a really great, really well-run workshop. And so I reached out and I said, you've got to be on my podcast. And I'm so glad that you're here. So thank you for that. Why don't you start a little bit with who you are, where you come from, and how you do life?
Yes, thank you. So, I live in Southern California. Not so sunny right now. We've had quite a bit of rain, which is great. But I have two kids. They're 12 and 14, and I am married to my husband of almost 18 years. And we now are pretty much retired from our full-time jobs and are working on building a life coaching business, and we're loving it right now. It's an experience, but I primarily work with mom entrepreneurs just like me, really build a life that they love and creating that harmony between life and business and not having the chaos and overwhelm take over our lives, which is why I also have a podcast that I named Organized Chaos, because that was how you could describe my life before we started to work intentionally on it.
I love it. And like all the buzzwords are flying for me. I mean, you said harmony. I love that. It's the final pillar of efficiency, bitch. And I really like that word really means a lot to me because the word itself means agreement. The word balance that everybody uses means
Mhm.
all parts are equal. And
Yes.
that's not possible when you're
Mhm.
a working mom who also may be a business owner. So many people are leaning into their side hustles right now, which
Mhm.
I love. I think the gig economy is the coolest thing.
Yeah.
But it does create a lot of different elements that you have to balance, but balance is never going to happen. So you have to find a
Right.
way for them to work in agreement. So that
Yeah.
word for me is just amazing. So thank you for echoing that. I hope that there's more and more of us that continue to say those things. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So talk a little bit about the challenge that you're doing on Facebook right now. How often do you do them? How can people find that? Because I'm in day 2 right now, and I'm an organized efficiency bitch myself, and I'm learning things from you. So I would love other people to be able to find that.
Oh, well, that's awesome. Yeah. So I'll start off with the reason why I created the challenge. I wanted to have a space for women who are really trying to keep themselves organized, because the overwhelm can creep in. Even if you have all the plans in the world and you're well intentioned, sometimes like the chaos just kind of takes over, and it can keep us from moving forward in our business, and also it can affect other aspects of our lives. So, when you kind of think about these things, you're like, okay, well, what has worked for me? Maybe I can create something that I can share with others that will help them in their journey and in the season of life that you're in. I mean, you mentioned how balance is not really sustainable or even possible. It's really about what season of life you're in, and creating that structure around that season of life, and then it changes, and then you kind of adjust to that. So I wanted to create something that was really simple, something that people can do in 3 days. And I decided that I wanted to pick some of the most important things that I have learned throughout our journey of over 10 years. And it was getting rid of the clutter, and not just in our physical environment, but also in our minds, because when we do have clutter, it also clutters our mind and we can't gain clarity. And I think clarity is the most important thing to have in your life and in your business, because once you have clarity, you can put those pieces in place to keep moving forward. So this challenge came about because I wanted to kind of put some of those elements, and it's really just kind of like a piece of my overall program. And I just wanted to have that so somebody can have a quick win.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you're spot on with phases of life, right? I think back to my life before I had children, and I thought I was very busy, but I had a lot going on. It wasn't that I wasn't busy. I just that was consuming every moment of my day. And then you have one kid, and then you have a
Mhm.
puppy, and then you have two kids, and then you have three kids, and then you add a business or a podcast or a book. Like those things, I added all that after children. Um, and people will often say to me, like, how do you do all of that? And the answer is I don't do it all at the same time.
Yeah.
And each phase of life, I had to recalibrate, readjust.
Mhm.
Life was very different when I had three kids and 5-point harness car seats. Over the weekend, my youngest just got out of his booster seat. So I
Mm.
no longer have children in car seats, which I've been in for 12 years.
Yeah.
So, there's different phases and different celebrations, and different pitfalls that can happen at each level.
Mhm.
But these things get easier and faster over time. So I love that you start with kind of like the things that you're teaching so far. I'm on day 2 of this 3-day challenge. Are things that help you reset at each phase, right? You can
Yeah.
reset here if you have no children. You can reset here if you're pregnant and
Mhm.
getting ready to have number 1 or number 4 or number 10.
Mhm.
I know a woman that just had her 10th baby, and
Oh
she
my gosh.
is amazing at juggling it all. I mean, she's got adult children to infants and runs a business. I mean, this stuff is super possible, but having tools like yours, reaching out into other people's tool belts is how you get it all done. Like that is how you do it. You use other people to help you get there.
Yeah.
And so I'm a big believer in all of those things.
Yeah. And talking about this woman who has had her 10th child, I can't even imagine. I mean, with two,
Mm-mm.
it's like, it's crazy for us. But we also have to understand that you can't do it alone. There has to be someone you can reach out to, resources that you can tap into, because it's not possible to do it all on your own. And I think there is like this myth that, well, you kind of see someone seems to have it all together. They're like, how do you do it all? I've gotten that question myself. How do you do it all? And my response is just like yours. I don't do it all. There is
Mm-mm.
no way I can do it all. You can do it efficiently, right? Because you ask for help, first of all, and that is the number one step. And something that is really hard for us, especially moms, to ask for help, because we think that if it's got to be done, it's got to be done by us. And
Yeah.
there's an element of guilt because you feel like you need to do it all. And there's also this element of control where you feel like you have to control everything. So you must do everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That one lands for me pretty hard. I definitely like the control, but you have to give it up. You have to ask for help. Somebody said to me recently that they had a hard time giving up their wife duties.
Mm.
And I just thought, what the hell's a wife duty?
What does
What's a
that
mom
mean?
duty? What does that mean? Um, but not too long ago, there was a kind of rule book for what you did if you were a wife. You had dinner on the
Mm.
table and you kept the house clean and you managed the children. And it's okay. I preach about this a lot here. It's okay that your mother taught you that. That was her reality. It's okay that your grandmother taught you that. That was her reality.
Mhm.
We live in a different era. It's okay that your life as a mother looks different than your mother's or your grandmother's. In
Yes.
fact, that's probably a good thing. And they would probably want that for you. I do come across like some generational or cultural nuances where people are like, no, this is the woman's role. This is where she should be. And if that's how you feel, that's your path in life, but it's not mine. and
Exactly.
and I'm here for the women who want to make that change, and support those who are interested in just what that may look like for their daughters, right?
Mhm.
Because their daughters are growing up in a generation where television does not depict the stay-at-home mom and the woman as taking care of the home. The television does not portray that any longer.
Yeah.
So the world is certainly shifting from that perspective as well.
Yes. And we've definitely embraced our different roles, like my husband and I, because I'm glad that our kids are able to see that, where, daddy can do things that normally maybe mommy would do, like,
Mhm.
laundry and dishes. And, my husband just went yesterday on a field trip with my son, because now he doesn't work full time anymore. He's at home, and he was able to do that. And my son was so excited for that. And normally it's like, oh, okay, well, mom will go and chaperone, at the field trip. But, he was excited to go. And I stayed home and worked. I had calls and everything. So, we embrace that, and we also focus on our strengths. So if I'm really good at something, then I embrace that. If he's really good at something, so we make it all work together, and it doesn't matter who's doing it as long as it's getting done.
It's all in harmony. You got to
Yeah.
get it all to agree, right? And I agree. I don't cook at all, ever, zero,
Yeah.
nothing. My husband does. He likes to cook. I don't
Yeah.
like to cook. But if you flash back 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, I was trying so hard
Mhm.
to cook every night because I thought it was my spot. And
Mhm.
it's just not. And I'll tell you, my happiness level is through the roof because I don't go to the grocery store. I don't plan the meals. I don't cook the meals. I don't do the dishes afterwards. This is not my job. He likes it. He does it.
Yeah.
Um, I take on a lot of the other things. And I've noticed a lot lately dads showing up at practice, like all my kids are in sports or art or whatever. And I've noticed a lot more dads doing drop off and pick up to those things,
Yeah.
even than I noticed a year or two ago. I feel like the
Mm.
pandemic has shifted some of those
Yeah.
duties. Um, Everybody went home, right? And so then it
Mhm.
was like the workload got distributed
Yes.
and maybe it didn't get redistributed back in that process. So really exciting. Everything I read has been very negative about women in the workplace through COVID, but they talk about this she session with women leaving the workforce. But what I'm seeing is more women starting their own businesses or going into working for themselves
Mhm.
and sharing responsibilities with the father. Um, and so it's interesting, and the more you kind of peel back those layers of that onion, the different things that are taking place in the culture's structure,
Yeah.
moving out of the COVID era.
Yeah.
I keep wondering when we're going to stop referring to COVID in 3 years.
I don't
Still
know.
comes up on almost every episode I've ever had.
It does, doesn't it?
It's a funny thing. So, why do you think it's so hard for us to manage our time as moms and as business owners? Why do you think we hold that? And we've talked a lot about that. But what's
Mhm.
the root cause there?
I think it mainly, and this is because I've experienced it and I've talked to many women who struggle with this. And when we really get down to the root of it, it's because they feel like they have to do it all. They put so much on their plate because they feel like they have to do it. So
Hmm.
it's not possible. Like I mentioned earlier, it's not possible to have that balance. And so when it comes down to it, there's no priorities. Everything needs to get done, and it needs to get done by you, according to you and your mind. So
Right.
you can't possibly manage your time, right? Because everything has the same level of importance. And even if it happens subconsciously, because if we really get down to it and get intentional and start writing things down, then we start to realize that, well, you know what, maybe this isn't as important, and maybe somebody else can do it. Maybe it still needs to get done, but maybe by somebody else, which is why I really teach this in my programs, is really um, abiding by the principle of the 80-20 rule. Because we can't possibly do it all. So we need to get real with ourselves and write down all of the things that we are trying to do, and then realize that we can't possibly do it. And there are things that we can do, and that's the 20%. And then the rest can still either get done or just get removed. And there's this sense of I don't want to say control, because we're never really in control, but it's just maybe going back to harmony, right? That's where you kind of feel that harmony, because you feel like the things that you have defined as the most important and your priorities in this moment in time are getting done, and they're getting done well, because now you don't have all of that, noise going on with all of the other things that are happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I write about that exact task in my book. That it happened to me by accident. I was just at my breaking point, and my husband and I got in a big fight, and I don't think he knew exactly what I was so mad about. But it was the load. It was the invisible load that I was carrying that was forcing me to do all of these things. And I wrote it all down, and I just was like, here you go. This is what I do. What can you take? And he added some stuff to the list that he was doing that was not on my radar. It was only a few things, let's be real. But he did have some things.
Yeah.
And then he took a bunch. And we also figured out what we could give to our children. At that point in time, when that exercise took place, the kids were 4, 6, and 8, very capable of feeding the dog, very capable of taking care of dog waste, very capable of emptying or loading the dishwasher. Or putting their clothes away. Like, we wash them and fold them, but they can take them to their rooms. And so those types of things, at that moment, it was a necessity for me. I didn't know what else to do. I wish I had thought intentionally about that conversation, so that it wasn't a fight, so that it was a discussion. And so those types of tools, those types of things, of writing it down, really does help. What are all the things? I'm sure that you've read or heard of Fair Play at this point.
I haven't.
Oh my gosh, she just came into my world about 6 months ago, and I wish I had read her book 5 years ago. I wish I had heard about her before I wrote my book, because I certainly would have referenced her. Eve Rodsky wrote Fair Play, and there's a Netflix series about it, but there's also a book. And she talks about how to have these conversations with your partner, because it's not always easy. If your spouse or partner is from a camp of, this is the man's job, this is the woman's job, it can be very difficult to have those conversations. My husband was very open to listening, and I'm very grateful for that. But I know not all men are. So if you have an opportunity, read that book. She offers some really great methodology in those discussions, but also kind of helps you write that list. She has a list of 100 things that have to be done in a life, in a household, with children, with work. Really, really, really cool. And it's funny, since I've learned about her, I've heard more and more people talk about her recently. So she must be getting some steam in this space. But really, really great information. I think I've referenced her 5 or 6 times on my podcast recently. But one of the things she really talks about that I think is so valuable is, she refers to it as CPE, which is conceive, plan, and execute. And she talks about, if you conceive of the idea and you plan the idea, but your partner has executed the idea, you're still holding 2/3 of the task. And so when you go write this list, if the list is plan the kid's birthday party, or actually a better example is cooking dinner. If your spouse is going to cook dinner, they also need to conceive, meaning come up with what dinner is going to be, and then plan it, meaning go to the grocery store and look up the recipe, and then execute it by making dinner. And that if women aren't willing to hand off the full task, all 3 pieces, you're going to continuously carry that load. And it's what I've been trying to do. It's exactly what you just described, but it gives such specific detail that I find so valuable for other women to hear. What are your thoughts on that?
I love that. And I would have never thought of it that way, because sometimes you can get into the idea that, oh, well, we're a team, so let's do this together. And going back to your example of cooking, maybe I come up with the idea of the dinner and then I order the ingredients, but then my husband cooks the food. So then you're like, oh, okay, well, it's all good because we're kind of working as a team, but I can see how that could be a problem, right? So that is
Yeah.
such an interesting idea, and really something to think about when it comes to your roles and like some of the things that you are going to take on. Because yes, it could be where you create an entire list and you're like, oh, well, I'm going to hand off these things. But if you still have your hand in some of those things, then you're not really uh, sharing the load like you should.
Yeah, and giving them full control. I mean, the more I started to unpack that idea, the more I was thinking, I'm still holding on to control if I'm conceiving and planning, right? Just because I'm
Yes.
not executing, I'm still holding on to that control, which means it's still on my mind, which
Yeah.
means I'm still worried. Did you do it right? Did you do it the way I planned it? Did you do
Hmm.
all these things? If we're going to start to unload that stuff, we're going to have to start to relinquish the full thing. I've done
Yeah.
some areas. I'm not perfect at this. I don't think anybody is, but it also started a dialogue in my household of the full task. So even when I give tasks to my children, my
Mm.
son is responsible, he's 8, for feeding the dog every day. He has to tell me if we're running low on dog food
Mhm.
and or put it on the grocery list on the Amazon Echo, you know? He
Yeah.
has to recognize that we're out of dog food, go put it on the grocery list so that he can execute his task. And so it's changed a lot of the dialogue in our household as well, which will only help them as
Mhm.
adults on
Yes.
to let go
Yes.
of those things. So it's fun.
Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up, I want to talk a little bit more about the strategies that you use to create a successful week. How do you plan your business? How do you execute for
Mhm.
yourself and the things that you do have control over, the things that are yours to hold?
Yes. Yeah. So I have spent years trying to figure out really a flow for myself and everybody in my family. So what I have found to be the number one piece is to have clarity. I need to understand what the goal is for the week. And it's just for the week. Because once you start, of course you can plan long term and you kind of break down those goals, but then you want to just have your focus on a short term goal. And having clarity is the number one thing. And then I start to kind of break it up. Okay, well, what are some of these pieces that I can work on this week that will uh, that will make me feel successful, and it's not like I have this giant project and then I want to finish the project start to finish for that week. No, I have to break it up into pieces, more manageable pieces, because I feel like I can create those small wins as long as I'm consistent. If I can make it so that it's easier for me to stay consistent with it, then that is the key to really getting it done in the long term. So I always plan my week, and I make sure I sit down for about an hour, hour and a half on Sundays when everything is quiet, the kids are still sleeping, my husband is off doing something else, and I can really focus on what the plan is. And I make sure that once I have that plan, I break up, or I create a time frame of when I'm going to do those things, because things come up. Last week, I had the best plan, but something came up, a family emergency. So I had to take care of that. But I still felt like it was a productive week because I didn't put the world on my shoulders to have everything done that week. So clarity, planning, and then the execution piece is the one of the hardest things to do, because I talk about this in my challenge, is that you can have the best plan, you can have the best intentions, but if your mind isn't in the right headspace, then nothing will happen. You can't move forward. So I make sure that I always have some type of personal development that's going to help me throughout the week. I have positive affirmations and I have a system each and every day that I can start off with, so that I know that going into each day, I have clarity and I'm in a good state of mind that's really going to help me move forward.
Yeah, I love that. I have some really similar processes. And it's interesting. A lot of people that I interview on this podcast have similar processes, and it's because they work.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, when I tell people who are not doing this, like that sounds like a lot. How are you handling all of those things? And the answer is it's habit. You
Hmm.
build a habit, and then it becomes part of, like, you don't talk about brushing your teeth. You don't talk about
Yeah.
those things that are part of your habits that you've been doing for your entire life. So it
Hmm.
just becomes one of those. You just naturally start to lean into those tasks, but you have to take the first step.
Hmm.
If you had to pick a single first step, somebody brand new into this space, what's the first thing that you typically recommend as habit number one?
Um, Focusing on yourself. I know
Yeah.
it might be cliche, but self-care is really, really critical because if we're not taking care of ourselves, we can't take care of other people around us. We can't focus. So taking some time to just um, have that space for yourself, even if it's 5 minutes. I've done meditation that are super quick just to calm myself down because normally we are up here when it comes to our stress level. And for your audience, I put my hands up really high. Um, and it's always up there. So doing some breathing exercises or just taking some time going in the closet. A lot of women do this where it's like, okay, I need a timeout. I'm going to go in a quiet space just to relax and, calm myself down. So
I
really
used to do that when
focusing
my
on,
kids were little, when the toddlers would follow me
yes.
everywhere I went.
Oh,
I'd go
and they would
hide in the
find you, right?
closet.
Yeah. You know, even the bathroom. I mean, sometimes that's
Yeah.
the only space and time that you can have some quiet time. But I think that's the number one thing. And it could also be the hardest because we tend to think that we have to put everybody else first. But
Yeah.
if we focus on ourselves, then we are at our best and we show up as our best for other people.
Yeah, I agree. What's made a huge difference for me is that hour in the morning where no one else is awake.
Mhm.
And a lot of people freak out when I tell them that morning is how the answer for me. But for me, if my kids have to get up at 6:30 to go to school, I need to be up at 5:30 so I have an hour to do whatever I want to do. And
Mhm.
nobody needs me. I'm not doing dishes. Sometimes I read, sometimes I write, sometimes I work out, sometimes I sit on my phone and drink coffee.
Yeah.
Sometimes all of those things, often all of those things within that
Mhm.
hour. But for me, if I don't have that hour in the morning, it messes up my whole day. It totally changes my
Mhm.
day if I don't have that time to wake up and to process and to decide what my day is going to hold.
Yeah.
That's my self-care, is that hour alone.
I love that.
And it's sometimes interrupted. My little one likes to get up sometimes, and he'll come and lay on the couch next to me and usually falls back to sleep, but sometimes not. It's not always perfect, but
Yeah.
I shoot for that all the time. And how do you make time for yourself when life's chaotic? What is your secret weapon?
It's similar to yours, waking up early. And when I tell
Yeah.
people what time I wake up, their jaw drops. But so I wake up at 3:30 in the morning. And I do this because, and this is going back to the habit where you create this habit because it's automation, right? And that's what works, is getting things to where it's just automatic. When I was working full time, I wanted to do some self-care. I wanted to work out before I went to work. And the only way I could do it is if I woke up at 3:30 in the morning because I had to get to
Mhm.
work really early. And that I haven't been to work for almost 7 years, and I'm still waking up at 3:30 because it works for me, because I can get stuff done. I can focus on myself. It's quiet in the house. I have several hours to do some journaling, read a book, do some work out, and then I wake up my kids.
Yep.
So for me, it doesn't have to look like that for everybody else, but for me, it works.
Yeah, I love that. What time do you go to bed?
I go to bed at 8 o'clock.
Yeah, me too. I'm an early well, maybe not 8. Usually I'm like on my way to bed at 8 o'clock, usually
Mhm.
falling asleep around 9. But I get a full 8 hours sleep every night plus, um, and can do all of the things. Like it's very, very doable as long as you're intentional and deliberate with the way that you spend your time.
Yeah. And it doesn't always work out. Like yesterday, my daughter has soccer practice until 8 o'clock. So of course I didn't get
Yeah.
to bed until 8 o'clock. However, that's the season we're in. It's literally
Yep.
soccer season. So that's going to happen. But I give myself grace when the times that doesn't happen. And if I wake up tired, if, it doesn't, I feel like I feel off, it's okay because tomorrow's a new
Yep.
day. Right.
Yeah, I imagine our teenagers will give us the run for the money when they're not coming home on curfew. We're both going to probably sing a
Yes.
different tune then, but
Hmm.
that's okay, right? Their season will
Yeah,
shift, and we'll come up with what happens next. Teresa,
exactly.
this is wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on. Would you share with the audience where people can connect with you, how they can find you?
Thank you. This was absolutely fantastic. I love your podcast and thank you for having me on. So if people want to connect with me, they can go to Instagram. It's Instagram.com/Teresa Hildebrand _coaching. And we'll have, I guess, a link for that because I don't expect
Yes.
anybody to remember that. But I also have my own podcast called Organized Chaos. And you can check it out wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can go to organizedchaospodcast.com.
Awesome. We will put all those links in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Well, that wraps it up. Thank you so much for listening. If you're new around here, please be sure to leave us a review on any podcast platform you're listening to. And you can always reach out to me to let me know what topics you're interested in hearing about, or maybe telling me someone you think would be great for the show. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at EfficiencyBee. Until next time, see ya!